Hey, are you ready to talk about Strange New Worlds Season 2, Episode 3? It's time. Hey, it is Dr. Trek, Larry Nemecek, coming right at you from the heart of Trekland. No, really. Through Portal 47 and the Trekland Treks, letting the dust settle just a bit, though, on all the latest news in Star Trek. So, instead of a hot take or a quick take, you get a second opinion from Dr. Trek. Hey, I have been writing, editing, interviewing, hosting, pundicating, commenting, archiving, dot connecting, and fanning too, for quite a while now. And I just want to say, last week was a quintessential Star Trek courtroom drama. This week, the quintessential Star Trek time travel. And I would almost say that this is maybe the most subdued Star Trek time travel we've ever seen, we've ever had. And yet, it has its own unique twist that makes it stand alone among all other Star Trek temporal anomaly stories. Bear with me. First I've got to say kudos this week for Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, a Shakespearean reference that's right up there with all our yesterdays. Kudos to David Reed, consulting producer on the show of late, who was a longtime EP on The Boys and The Magicians before that. This is his first Star Trek script. And fellow producer Bill Wolkoff says that David is a longtime Trekkie. I think it shows. Also, director Amanda Rowe, who's not only had credits on Doom Patrol and Nancy Drew, but she directed first season for Strange New, The Elysian Kingdom. So if it's a fish out of water episode, you give it to Amanda. And the supervisor of the directors, Chris Fisher, who directed episode 1, says that she really brought this home dealing with COVID and weather. You can see the snow flurries at times, and just overall scheduling headaches, and brought it in like a trooper. So that will take you far in this profession. Okay, little things. Stardate 1581.2. We're going backwards in stardates now. It's been a little loosey-goosey, but they tend to progress forward here in Strange New Worlds. They did that on the original series too, and we get all up into the way Next Generation made everything so regimented. If you remember the original series, Gene wanted to hedge this. They were so paranoid about getting shows completed on time. The way they were filmed was not always the way they got aired due to the visual effects. He came up with that cockamamie story. Well, the sci-fi explanation of Stardate order, or where your Stardate was, all depended on your location in the galaxy, what warp factors you were traveling at, and even the local density of matter in the space you were traveling through. So I think we're going to have to go back and call on that OG definition of warp drive, because these Stardates, well, this has been a step backward, but then it is the timey-wimey episode. So we're going to keep our eye on this one. Now look, this story is dealing with lots of alternate universes. There's plenty of non-prime timeline stuff flying around. So a lot of it's just going to be canon to that universe. It's not going to affect the prime timeline. So it's fun to say, oh, well, he's flying for the United Earth Fleet ship Enterprise, that the Shirelle is Spock's Vulcan ship. I guess they named it for 60s girls groups. Who knows? And everybody is fighting everybody. The Vulcans versus the Romulans versus the humans. Still, it's fun here to say, yeah, the back and forth herky-jerky Kirk driving of a gas combustion vehicle, it's an homage to a piece of the action, obviously. The way you get cash in this alternate universe time, this alternate 2022, is, well, not by pawnbroking, not by manual labor, but by playing chess. And before you get panties in a wad here, remember, Kirk did beat Spock in the first time we met them in Where No Man Has Gone Before. It was an annoying victory, in fact. So that's not such a far stretch. Chess for money. I didn't see that one coming. And of course, many have pointed out that the DTI agents, well, that device, the logo and the little graphic, is the same logo we saw aboard the Relativity in the Voyager episode of the same name. So kudos to the art staff there. And these Romulan agents, they self-immolate when they're caught. I know they're secret. Are they Tal Shiar? Are they temporal Tal Shiar? It reminds me a lot of how the Romulan agents, the Tal Shiar, would self-destruct with no clues left behind using acid 100 years later in the first season of Picard. Oh, and it's so cool how Denobulans are all over this episode. Now, look, there'd been a lot of debate after Enterprise about why we never saw Denobulans. Of course, it's the order of the way the series are produced, but we never saw Denobulans, heard them mentioned anytime after Enterprise. There are all kinds of fan theories, headcanon. Did they withdraw from the Federation? Did they go into isolation? Were they wiped out? What's going on? Now, thankfully, Lower Decks took the lead here. We saw at least a couple of Denobulans on Lower Decks. Here we've got, the alt universe Kirk talks about being in a Denobulan jail, but no, we've got a prime timeline Denobulan cadet arguing in that early scene. So, yay, Denobula. And speaking of the DTI, the Department of Temporal Investigations, which of course we have from Trials and Tribulations, it's first mentioned chronologically for us. But here we learn that the DTI was not created at least until after the real primetime time of Strange New Worlds, 2260. So it's sometime after that. Maybe we'll figure out that it was created expressly because of Kirk and his time-traveling tendencies. Oh, and please tell me that you noticed that the alternate universe Kirk was not born in Iowa, but on Iowa. Well, the USS Iowa of his Earth fleet. All right, I have some questions. Now, once again, we get into this whole thing about dating the eugenics wars. So here it's 2022. It's in the past Toronto, and Khan is 10 or 12 here when we see him. And there's this emerging theory now that's pushed the eugenics wars forward into this century. I know it's to make up for the fact that in the 1960s original series felt 30 years ahead of time was going to be, in the future was going to be far enough. We have since realized what happened to the eugenics wars. I've lived right past them. What about you? Greg Cox in his pro novels for Pocket Books talked about the eugenics wars being a secret underground war in the third world. Well, since then, the current producers have been getting together here, especially Strange New Worlds. Aaron Walke's talked about it over on Prodigy, that the temporal wars, which we really haven't begun to explore yet, this whole notion that's come out since Enterprise, which means it's across the eras, across the showrunners, that the ripple effects from the temporal wars somehow shifted the eugenics wars forward to, say, the 30s of this century. So that's a convenient way of retconning the whole thing. Now, still, though, realize Spock, 6-7 years from now, this point in Strange New Worlds, is still talking about the eugenics wars being 1992 to 1996. Why? I still like to go with the idea of just saying that the records were fragmentary, as he says, and that at some point in the future, say by Picard's time, etc., that they find that they've been dating the eugenics wars incorrectly all this time. But this is very definitely a work in progress, so stay tuned. Meanwhile, I'm very, very intrigued by the red sweater photo there of young Khan's fellow augments. What, there were 4 girls, 3 boys total? Is that going to lead to anything? But the weirdest question of all to me in this episode is they've just had a bridge bombing, a terrorist attack. It's almost a Twin Towers event there in Toronto. And this one Toronto cop is just on his coffee break, relaxed as all get out, and gives chase to a speeder. It didn't quite jibe with me for some reason. Okay, on the character side, wow, M'Benga looks very at home here in the martial arts arena, sparring around with Lon, and it gives his killer soldier fit. Thanks to the green stuff, I know, but it gives that whole episode a little bit of heft. And of course, we know that Babs himself is a martial arts champion in his past. So we're obviously seeing the producers, the writers playing to the individual actors' strengths. it's starting to resonate very realistically. And of course, we're having more fun with Pelia. What does a being that lives for thousands of years look like? They're a pack rat, kinda. They're a selective pack rat. They only do it out of boredom purely. It's a wonderful stroke to use her as the Guinan of this episode and have her be the anchor in time and put at least a third character into this plot. But we're still collecting clues about her people, the Lanthrocytes. And in this episode, they're called a sect. Which is it? Species or sect? Most of all, this is clearly a tour de force for La'an. It's a bravura performance for Christina Chong. Now, she shares the spotlight with Paul Wesley as Kirk. They clearly got chemistry. It's a lot of fun to watch. But she's giving us prime La'an. He's an alternate universe Kirk. I mean, these two do so much with so little. And so little the rest of the cast is used, it really does feel like one of those DS9s with all the obligatory scenes the same way. Whoever had the spotlight, usually it would be Quark is the one-off scene, the token scene in the bar, the token scene in Ops where Worf had his scene, the token scene in Security when you'd see Odo for once. But it's rare that, I mean, this has to be the most couple-dominant time travel story ever. Even more so than City on the Edge of Forever. And yet, I spent a lot of this episode feeling like this was really a pale imitation of a City on the Edge of Forever, or even a Yesterday's Enterprise, or a Star Trek IV. I really was in a lot of a not care attitude for a lot of this episode. And when it was not being subdued, it was all hijinks. And I felt I was watching the Lower Decks episode. The vibe coming through a few slots early. I mean, hijinks works on Lower Decks. We've seen hijinks here, but do we think less of it in live action? I guess one thing that bugged me here was that they seemed to adapt to the situation, coming out of different time streams and then jointly being in the past with an unknown pivot point. They just seem to adapt to everything so easily. That's, But then again, so did Seven and Raffi on fake future Earth. Come to think of it, Seven took to that whole car thing pretty easy too. At least I was in a can't care attitude until they killed off Kirk. And I gotta say, alternate or not, that got my attention. That, and it was a great turn, I thought. I didn't see it coming. That Sarah, the wacko here, I almost thought would be, the captain from the future that we had in Voyager's time travel, Futures Past. No, I did not see that coming. It was really downplayed, so kudos there. In fact, 2/3 of the way through this episode, my blasé attitude about the time travel completely changed because I realized what was going on here. And again, this is all about La'an. It's not even a duet of importance. She is the focus. She's the prime timeline character here. It's all about her point of view, and obviously it comes down to the fact that the pivot point in time is Khan. Now remember, in the real prime timeline, no one knows what happened to Khan. He's the Amelia Earhart here, or the anti-Amelia Earhart. It's going to be 6 or 7 years before Kirk and Spock find the Botany Bay and unleash everything that happens on Ceti Alpha 5 coming up. At this point, he's still an enigma. She's dealing with the legacy purely by name over the centuries. And what happens here is, it's exactly like City on the Edge of Forever, only the reverse. In City on the Edge of Forever, Kirk has to let Edith Keeler die to keep the timeline straight, the timeline they're in. Here, La'an has to let Khan live. And she has to live with the knowledge of what she's unleashing, what she's letting happen to the rest of the world. But if she doesn't, she embarks on a completely strange new timeline, and she has no idea what her future is from her point of view. Can I just say, though, that I did enjoy the debate between Kirk and La'an about, well, whose timeline should take priority? That's kind of a meta issue that never really gets, that's like the Tuvix of the timeline temporal debate. Oh, yeah? Just because you're the prime timeline character, that's your perspective, kiddo. What makes your timeline better than mine? There's a little bit of debate that, and it's cute. But no, this is strictly about Lon making the huge decision to sacrifice the future that she knows will happen rather than sacrificing the person in front of her. Otherwise, it should have been easy, as she's taunted to nearly doing. It should have been easier for her to do that, to pull the trigger on her forebear and potentially wipe herself out. So yes, this episode really creeped up on me. I was prepared to be all a little let down by a time travel show. And then it got you in the end. Oh, and by the way, when La'an says we must get to the bridge, how many of you were thinking, wait, there's a starship around? I thought they were in the past. All right. That seems like a good place to call a halt to this second opinion. What about you? What do you think? What did you think of tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow? Did it sit with you differently by the time it was all over and you could reflect on the totality of the entire episode? Let me know. Let me think. Comment below, and while you're at it, hey, like and share us, would you please? Boost the signal. Hey, I dare you to subscribe to some Star Trek sanity. Most of all, if you enjoyed Dr. Trek here in our Trekland point of view, please, you can check out all of our podcasts and our live streams and experiences like Trekland Tuesdays Live on Tuesdays at 1 Pacific, 4 Eastern, our weekly Roddenberry podcast, The Trek Files. Hey, you can check out the Trekland Treks Day Tours and, of course, Portal 47, your backstage pass every month. And sure, Cadet Alice and Dr. Trek are going to be watching Prodigy no matter what. All of that is over at LarryNemecek.com. Trek well, everybody. And I'll be home soon.